Look at this chart. The US Strategic Petroleum Reserve stays at 415 million barrels, 58% of maximum capacity. We have not fully refilled it since 2022. That means there is no emergency buffer to dump into the market and suppress a price spike. Most people watching financial news have no idea why that number is the starting pistol for everything happening right now. But if you are looking at the data, it is impossible to miss. As of today, Brent crude oil is above $90. JP Morgan's latest estimate is that if Hormuz stays closed, oil goes to 120 to 130 a barrel. Tanker traffic is down 70% and 150 ships are anchored and waiting. And the oil volatility index just hit 103, a level that historically signals markets are in panic mode. And here is the signal that tells you this is already real. Kuwait Petroleum Corporation, one of the world's top 10 oil exporters, has just announced a precautionary production cut. They cited explicitly Iranian aggression against Kuwait and Iranian threats against safe passage through Hormuz. And here is what most analysts are missing about that cut. Oil production is not a white switch. When a producer idles wells and reduces refinery throughput, the infrastructure does not simply restart on command. Wellhead pressure drops, equipment goes cold, crews are reassigned, and getting back to prior output levels takes months, sometimes weeks, not days. So even if the situation resolves next week, that supply is already gone from the market for the near term. And now look at what Japan just did. According to Kyoto News, today Japan is considering releasing its national oil stockpile. And here is the key phrase: even without coordinated international action. So they are not waiting for the IEA, they're not waiting for Washington, and because Japan imports over 90% of its crude from the Middle East, with 70% of that passing through Hormuz, they're acting alone because they cannot afford to wait. So in the last 24 hours, Kuwait has cut production, Japan has broken ranks with the IEA, and Washington has unsanctioned rationale. Three separate governments, three separate panic moves. And now look at this, Iran has clarified that the strait is not closed to everyone, only to their enemies. They are explicitly allowing what they call friendly ships to pass freely. And the largest beneficiary of that policy is of course China, Iran's single biggest crude oil customer. What this means in practice is this: Chinese-flagged and China-bound tankers have a green light, US, Israeli, Europeans, and allied vessels do not. Iran's military has warned this afternoon that vessels from hostile nations attempting to transit are considered legitimate military targets. So while the West pays $92 a barrel and rising, China is quietly moving Iranian oil through the Strait of Hormuz at a steep discount. Some analysts are already describing this as a geopolitical wealth transfer, and the data is hard to argue with. And look at what happened simultaneously. Fujairah, the Middle East's largest bunkering hub, experienced a fire in its oil industry zone, caused by a falling drone debris. Bunker suppliers there have already declared force majeure. Fujairah sits outside the Strait of Hormuz and is one of the world's primary oil transit terminals. When that facility is affected, the disruption is no longer theoretical. This has happened before. In 1979, a simultaneous SPR shortfall and Hormuz disruption sent oil up 100% in 12 months. Inflation hit 14.8% and the Fed was forced to 20% rates. Double depreciation followed immediately. The question is not whether this is happening. The data says it already is. The question is how far down the chain we are. This is exactly the kind of data that moves fast and most people see too late. So if you want to be ahead of it, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. I cover this every time the numbers change, so it takes only 2 seconds and it's free. Now let me show you where this hits your wallet directly. Here are the 3 inflationary shocks hitting simultaneously right now. Shock 1. Ships rerouting around Africa at 10 to 14 extra days at sea. At $92 oil and JP Morgan's 130 ceiling, if this holds, every extra day is a hard cost increase on every cargo. We also have war risk insurance, which is now cancelled for the Persian Gulf. Argus Media says that freight rates are already up 40% in weeks, from $45 to $60 to $75 per ton. We also have shock 3. Because we have longer roads, this means fewer ships are available right now globally. And also this means effective fleet shrinks overnight. And because of that, base freight rates explode across all trade lanes. Now, here is the part that makes this impossible for the Federal Reserve to fix. February non-farm payrolls were negative 92,000 jobs, and over the past 12 months, the BLS has revised prior payroll reports downward by nearly 700,000 jobs in total. That gap fundamentally undermines the strong labor market narrative that the Fed has been citing to justify keeping rates elevated. Here is the trap. Normally, a negative jobs print forces the Federal Reserve to cut rates, but they cannot cut into an oil shock, because the oil shock pours accelerant on inflation, and they cannot hold because the labor market is already cracking. This is stagflation. And it is not just a US problem. UK 2-year bond yield jumped 20 basis points today alone as energy prices soared. The contagion is already moving globally. So the Federal Reserve has no good options here, and that is the bind markets are pricing in right now. And that is exactly why the US Treasury on March 5th issued an emergency waiver allowing sanctioned Russian crude to be delivered and sold. And Treasury Secretary Bresson confirmed on Fox Business last night that they are considering unsanctioning even more. So they spent 3 years sanctioning this exact oil. I think this is not strength, and I think this is a desperate move that confirms the global crisis. And this is where it hits your grocery bill. Wheat is up 50% in 1 month, corn is up 4.3%, soybeans is up 6.6%, and institutions are already front-running the entire agricultural complex. Because if oil, fertilizer, and shipping all spike together, food costs hit consumer budgets within 90 days. Discretionary spending collapses and corporate earnings fall. So here is the counter thesis. Iran has already signaled it won't shoot at neighboring Gulf states. So if a verified ceasefire allows insurance to be restored and tankers to move, this thesis breaks. Oil prices down fast, and that's why I'm watching one indicator above all others for that signal. If war risk insurance is restored for Hormuz transit by any major underwriter, that is your de-escalation signal. Until then, 115 million barrels, 58% capacity, and a selective blockade. And don't forget JP Morgan saying that oil could hit $130. So I'm not giving you a financial advice, this is strictly how I'm thinking about my own portfolio allocations. All investments involve risk. The math does not lie though.